Hello and welcome to this Dark Money Files Corporate Investigations Masterclass introductory session. My name's Graham Barrow and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. Here at the Dark Money Files, we have a mission to educate and inform on all matters to do with anti-monetary crime. And today we're going to look at some of the best publicly available corporate registries, which should form both the start and the heart of most corporate investigations. To do them justice, I'm going to use a real-life case study, but I'd like to make it really clear before we begin that there is no suggestion, either implied or explicit, that anyone or any company mentioned in today's session has or is in any way involved in any criminality. Excuse me. The case study was chosen because everything you're about to see is in the public domain, and there are elements to this case study that help me to explain really clearly the strengths of each of the three open source databases we're going to be looking at. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to these databases. So this session will provide then an introduction to three main corporate register databases that I use all the time, and they are Companies House, OpenCorporates and OpenOwnership. And it's a precursor to how we use them in detail in the full masterclasses that we offer. But in saying that, actually this session has huge value, I think, on its own merits and is really worthwhile getting involved in and watching simply for the knowledge that you'll gain from this session. But I will explain over the next 60 minutes what each of these are best for and how to vary your use of them depending on the type of entity that's under investigation. Of necessity, what we're going to talk about will be have a UK nexus, Companies House specifically, but Open Corporates and Open Ownership also have a global reach, particularly Open Corporates, so that the case study will actually spread out across other countries. And as I say, we're going to use a real life case study. So the start of our journey is actually not the UK, but Latvia. And I was involved in running a project looking at UK limited liability partnerships that were investing in Latvia. And the reason I was doing that was twofold, really. One, that Latvia has in the past 10 or 12 years had some specific issues relating to money laundering. It's had some banks who have been identified as being problematic, and it's been involved in a number of the major stories you would have read about the Russian laundromat and the Azerbaijani laundromat and Danske Bank and others. But it also, and to its credit, has an easily or relatively easily accessible register for all companies who have inward investment into Latvian companies, and that information is in the public domain. So I was doing a project with a company called Caspian, who have got some really clever artificial intelligence AML investigative instruments. And we downloaded and interrogated a list of all UK entities that had invested in Latvia since 2010. Now, I think it's fair to say that that threw up some surprises, a number of surprises. For example, about 80%, I guess, of all of the companies that have invested into Latvia from the UK have been limited liability partnerships, which is really significantly out of whack with the ratio of UK LLPs generally to other corporate entities in the UK. So very top end heavy on LLPs investing into Latvia. But what I want to do is I want to take you on the investigation that we did for one of them. Now, the first sighting of this investigation was here. We had this database of the inward investors, and we noticed that there were three Latvian companies, which are the ones you can see on the left of your screen, and each of them had had an inward investment from the same 5 UK limited liability partnerships, which you can see just left of centre. Now, that in itself was pretty odd that 5 UK LLPs had invested in 3 separate Latvian companies, and they'd invested equal amounts. And actually, if you add up the investments, it comes to the minimum share capital required for a Latvian. It's called an SIA, which is the equivalent of a UK limited company. So that investment, you can see there, is not physical money. That is the nominal value of the shares that were bought. So could well be considerably more than that. I don't actually know how much the physical investment was, but those are the shares that were purchased. And the other thing that caught my eye, just simply because it happened to be my birthday, was it was the 24th of October 2011. And oddly, that date will become relevant as we go through this session. So there we are on the 24th of October 2011. These 5 UK LLPs decided equally to invest in these 3 Latvian companies. So that piqued my interest. I thought, well, I need to know a little bit more. So I'm going to start looking at one of them to see a bit more detail. Now, the one I closed was Lanefield, because when you're doing investigations of any sort, really, it's always a good idea to look for distinctive phrases or words, because it's a natural excluder of false positives. If you are looking on the internet for somebody called John Smith, you're going to get a lot of hits. If you're looking for somebody, I don't know, called Aloysius Ponsonby Smythe Downing, you're probably not going to get lots of false positives, because it's such a distinctive name. And by the way, I just made that up in case there's anyone of the same name listening. I doubt it. So Lanefield was my starting point. And the other thing I thought is it looked like it could be a typo. I mean, it could have been somebody's surname, but it just instinctively looked like it was supposed to be Lanefield and had been mistyped. But it hadn't, and that was actually the name of this company as registered. So let's go and have a look. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go first to the OpenCorporates website to start this off, and probably when I get there I'm going to have to log in, but so bear with me while I do all those things. What I'm also going to probably need to do is make my screen a little bit bigger when we get there, so that you can comfortably see what's going to appear on the screen, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm actually just going to log in. I have an enterprise account at OpenCorporates. It isn't terribly expensive. It's £199 a year plus VAT, so it's about £20 a month, I guess. But it enables you to do significantly more from my point of view, because you can search by registered addresses and you can pull up a lot more relevant information at the same time. So it's one of the very few that I paid to have an enterprise account with. However, the free account, which you can get from OpenCorporate, still will achieve a huge amount for you. Let me just zoom this in a little bit. And I want to take you through this page in a little bit of detail, because it's very easy when you're looking at some of these pages to just zone in on the bits of information you want and miss some of the other things that you can do. So let me just start at the top here. Here, obviously, you can search either by company or by officer. So you can look for specific officers of companies, or you can look for specific companies. This is a UK company, so it has the UK company number at the top. Because it's a limited liability partnership, it has the prefix of OC, which is the standard Companies House prefix for LLPs, and they have various prefixes for other legal entities. We can see that Lanefield is an active company, so it is still active today. It was incorporated on the 2nd of August 2011. Now that is relevant, because we've just seen that the investments were made into Latvia on the 24th of October 2011. So that was only a bare 3 months after this company was incorporated. And that seems like a very good thing for a company to be able to do so soon after incorporation, to be investing in companies in other countries. So that intrigues me. You'll also see that it has had 2 ultimate beneficial owners, and they're given as Mrs. Irita Enkuzena Secchi and Mr. Marco Giovanni Maria Secchi. And although they're spelt differently, I fancy they are definitely pronounced the same way. Also worth mentioning at this point that ultimate beneficial owner in Open Corporates terms is not quite the same thing as it might be for an AML specialist. For an AML specialist, ultimate beneficial owner has a very strict legal meaning, and it will be defined in whatever country that you're working in by your country's anti-money laundering regulations. And because they differ around the world, some of them here in the EU will say anyone who owns or controls more than 25%. In other countries, it is actually 25% or more. So a slight difference, but it has a significant impact on who is an UBO and who isn't. And in yet other countries, it can be 10% or 5% or 20%. So when you see ultimate beneficial owner here on Open Corporates, it means effectively those people who have been designated as owners or controllers of the company, rather than the strict legal meaning that you might use in an AML environment. It's got a registered address, which, as you can see, is now in Anlaby in Hull. Its latest accounts were filed in August 2019, which means that they're up to date, because that's when, at the time of recording, in June 2020, we were still under 12 months since those filings, so they're on time. And then it's got the annual return date, but you can ignore that because we've moved away from annual returns to annual confirmation statements, so it's now slightly redundant. And then it's got the officers of the LLP. In the case of an LLP, they're called designated members rather than directors, but they are still essentially the officers of the company. And as you can see, they're called Brontex Solutions Inc. and Wellington Capital Inc. And also we can see that there's been a retirement of Crontex Solution Inc. So Crontex and Wellington were appointed at the date of incorporation, but in July 2015, Crontex obviously resigned and Brontex were appointed in their place. Now I'm kind of intrigued by very similarly named companies, so that's worth a note as well. And what you can do at this point, if you click on one of these, it will take you to a page with Brontex Solutions on, and clicking again will bring up Brontex Solutions appointments, and you'll be able to see here, make it a bit bigger. Brontex has got 5 appointments. The ones in bold are still live, and the ones that are greyed out are now inactive. But I think you can see, if you recall from the previous slide, that these appointments are the same 5 LLPs that invested into those companies in Latvia, which makes the situation a little bit more intriguing. So hold that thought, and we'll go back to our original page. Now, why am I finding this intriguing? Well, at least in part because I know that in most countries of the world, if you have 5 owners of a company and they are equal owners, there are very few countries in the world where they would be qualified as formal ultimate beneficial owners. So because I'm just a naturally cynical and suspicious person, when I see 5 equal ownership, particularly 5 equal ownership across 3 different companies, it does make me curious, because it would be a way of circumventing naming a beneficial owner, because you wouldn't be required to, where there are circumstances where they are lower than 20%, unless of course you can show that there is commonality of ownership. Hold that thought. So clearly we have an indicator that there might be, because if all 5 have got the same, at least one of the same officers, and if we click on Wellington Capital, I think it will be apparent that also has the same 5 LLPs as its, of which it's the officer. Then that is a red flag and needs to be understood better, simply because if 5 companies have got the same control through their officers, it suggests that they are linked in more ways than one. So that's the basic information page. You'll see at the bottom, very helpfully, it has a link, a direct link to the Companies House page. And I'm going to open that in a separate tab. So it's sitting there waiting for me in a minute when I go and have a look at Companies House, because the Companies House website presents certain information in a way that I find easier to consume than OpenCorporates. And OpenCorporates, on the other hand, does other things better than Companies House, which is why I use both of them. Now, what we have next here is we have the statements of control, and we can see straight away that these two names are here that from at the top of the page: Marco Giovanni Maria Secchi and Irita Enkuzena Secchi. And we can also see over here on the right, which I'm just highlighting, is that for Mrs. Enkuzena Secchi, these are historic details, and that means that she has clearly resigned or left her role as the person with significant control, and that Mr. Secchi has taken over those duties. So that's again worth noting. And then we have the filings details. Now, a couple of things to note on the filings. One, here over on the left, we have the title of the filing, and you'll notice that almost all of these, as I scroll down, are in italics, and that means that there is a direct link from that entry to the filing itself. So you don't need to go via the main Companies House page. Clicking on those links, and we'll click on one in a minute, takes us directly to the filings. There is one here, you'll notice, that's not in italics, which is a change of registered office address. And effectively all that means is that at some point that link got broken, and now you can't link directly. And that could be for some very straightforward reasons, like there was a problem at the with the filings and it was removed and reinstated or whatever, and that linkage has been lost. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But all the others you'll see are italicized, and also notice at the bottom that this is not all of the records. So there is a second page of records which we could go and look at. Actually, we're going to look at Companies House in a minute, so not to worry. Let's just click on, and I'm going to just pick the annual accounts for 2016, and you'll see that it brings those accounts up directly from Companies House and bypasses the registry page. Let's have a look at them. So at this point, the company was registered to an address in Tyne and Wear. So we've already seen that it's now registered to an address in Anlaby in Hull. And you may have noticed that the link that got broken was referencing a move from Tyne and Wear to Newcastle upon Tyne. So this has had already at least 3 registered addresses, which is quite odd. One other thing to point out before we move on is this little sticker here is affixed by Companies House when accounts are sent in on paper. So if you file on paper, the Companies House will scan them into the registry, and they will affix this sticker, and it has some really useful information on. And in the main masterclass series that we run, we talk about that information and how useful it can be in investigations. But you can see it clearly tells you the day of the week this was scanned, Thursday. It was scanned on the 3rd of March 2016. It's been given a barcode as a unique identifier and also a hash number, and that hash number 299 is the number that this document was in the documents that were scanned on the 3rd of March 2016. So this was the 299th document scanned into the registry on the 3rd of March 2016. All of that can be very useful information. But let's carry on. This is the financial statements. Now, do bear in mind this is an LLP, and therefore the only requirement for LLPs to file accounts is the Companies House. Because it's not a taxable entity, it doesn't need to file accounts with HMRC, because the profits of the LLP are taxed in the hands of the members, and therefore that the entity itself is not a taxable entity. So these are Companies House only, and here is the members report. You can see the members are Wellington Capital and Brontex Solutions. It says the limited liability partnership remained dormant during the financial year. And it's been signed by, and I would say that clearly looks to be, Irita Enkuzena Seki on behalf of Wellington Capital Limited. So just need to be clear in your minds what that means, because Irita Enkuzena Seki was identified as at one point as the person with significant control, but clearly she is also signing here on behalf of Wellington Capital, who are one of the officers of the company. So it would apparently appear that Mrs. Enkuzena Seki is both behind one of the officers, and also separately is a person with significant control. And as you're going to see, these accounts are completely dormant. Okay, fine. One of the questions you might ask, though, because they've clearly been filing dormant accounts for 2014, here for 2015, here for 2016, dormant still 2017, dormant for 2018, and in fact, it's only up until 2019 that they have filed some accounts. And yet you can see from the filing history that this company has moved a number of times. It's moved from Centenary Avenue to Newcastle. It's moved from Newcastle to Hull. It's then amended its address in Hull. It's a very tiny amendment. You can see it's added East Yorkshire to the address. That's the only change as far as I can see. But that's quite a lot of activity for a company that's dormant. You might wonder, why would you be moving a company? And I don't know the answer to this. That's dormant to a variety of different addresses. Now I know the last one, the one in Hull, is a firm of accountants, but it was returning for quite a while dormant accounts that don't really suggest you need an accountant. But hey, there we are. At this point, I'm going to go over to Companies House, because Companies House actually shows some information rather better than OpenCorporates does. So let's go there. We'll go to the filing history. Now, obviously, this is going to be in large part the same as OpenCorporates. I mean, it will be. But there are a couple of additional bits of information. For example, here at the top, you'll notice, let me do that again, here, the latest set of accounts are available both in PDF and IXBRL format. IXBRL I've only recently come across, but if you're a data person, you'll know that that is a standardized format for accounts. So if you have the requisite software, you can download an IXBRL file and it will display that information in a consistent fashion. Which, if you happen to be that way minded, is extremely useful. I tend to just look at the PDFs because I'm not that much of a data person. I'm too old now to be catching up on all that stuff, he says. But one of the other things you'll see here is that there's a previous office move, because Companies House actually have more filings on the page than OpenCorporates. This is on this page. But they started off at 27 Old Gloucester Street before moving to Centenary Avenue in Tyne Wear, before going to King Charles Tower, before going to Hull. So that's quite an odd thing. And this is all before they've ever filed any active accounts. So having 4 registered addresses while dormant is at the very least, it's a red flag. It's something you'd want explaining. It doesn't mean it's suspicious per se. It just means it's odd. And therefore, if you are doing a due diligence or an investigation, whether that's just an enhanced due diligence or whatever, it's one of those things that you ought to have a reasonable and rational explanation for. Why has this company moved 4 times when it wasn't doing any business? So, and as I say, I can't give you an answer for that, but it's a question you'd want to ask. Now, if we go to the People tab, we'll see straight away that Brontex and Wellington Capital are the current members, and we'll also see, of course, that they are located not here in the UK, but in Belize, which is noted to be one of those locations that can be very difficult to extract corporate information from. You'll notice that they're both, well, Brontex is actually a legal form of an IBC. Wellington Capital is shown as a limited company, but both under the IBC Act. Which is, for those of you who know, obviously an IBC is a company that is allowed to register in a certain jurisdiction, providing it doesn't do business in that jurisdiction. So these are Belize-based international business companies. And actually, Crontex, we see, is also in the same boat. Crontex, oddly, has the same address as Wellington, but virtually the same name as Brontex, just to make life interesting. Excuse me. So let's have a look at the persons with significant control, and here we can see they were indeed used to be Rita Enkuzena Secchi and is now Marco Giovanni Maria Secchi. Not surprisingly, we can see from the public record that Mr. Secchi is Italian. He was born in December 1957 and he now lives in Latvia, which is not a huge surprise given that these companies have invested in Latvian companies. We can also see that Mrs. Enkuzena Secchi has got a different address, also in Riga, but a different address, is somewhat younger, as having been born in October 79, and is actually Latvian. So I think we can work a couple of things from that. Clearly, Mrs. Enkuzena Secchi has turned her surname into a Latvian spelling rather than the Italian. And by the age differences, you'd say it's probably more likely she was a daughter-in-law than a wife. It's not impossible, of course. But the fact they're at different addresses and she's retained her maiden name and added Secchi, I would tend to the view that she was daughter-in-law, but clearly she could have been married to Mr. Secchi, they've subsequently divorced, or they have separate accommodation or whatever. There's a whole variety of things it could be. But that would be where my kind of instincts were. And for those of you who haven't used this, can I just point out there is now what's called the More tab on Companies House. You'll need to have an account at Companies House to access this, which I have. So you sign in. And then what does it do? Well, it does this really quite handy thing because it will aggregate all of that information into an HTML document, which you can then download. And of course, if you're preparing a due diligence file or something similar, that then gives you a really, really useful overview of the entire basic structure and filing history of the company. And as an addition, and now obviously you could save that as a PDF and electronically save it to your due diligence file, which is extremely useful and well done, Companies House. I use that now all the time. Okay, so we've got an idea now about Lanefield. We know where it was, we know its filing history, we know its people. So where do we go from here? Well, I think we go back to OpenCorporates. One of the things I'm always interested in is where we have named owners is this their only relationship with any corporate entities? And because Miss Enkuzena Secchi has got such an unusual name, she's a good place to start. So what I would do now, what I did when I was doing this for real, I would pop her into the search box and I put her in as an officer, just to see whether she's a director or other officer of any other companies. And this was one of those moments when I had to look twice because this popped up. And to begin with, I was just looking at the companies and I thought to myself, oh yeah, she's the same 5 companies. And then it dawned on me that actually the ones I were looking at were LLPs, not limited companies. And anyway, that's a New Zealand flag and not a UK flag. And it was one of those moments when I had to look twice and say, well, hold on, these are New Zealand companies. And apparently, Ms. Enkuzena, as she was then, no Secchi, was the director of all of these companies, all of which, other than the missing E in Lanefield, have exactly the same names as the UK LLPs. Well, how bizarre. And then you look at the incorporation and dissolve dates, and let me highlight this one. And you can see in this case for Victoria Point, it was incorporated on the 27th of October 2005, and it was dissolved in whatever way on the 25th of July 2011, which is no more than 2 weeks prior to the creation of the UK LLPs. And apparently that's pretty much what happened with all 5 who were dissolved at various points in 2011, and all of which were then created with an LLP at the end instead of a limited in the UK 2-3 weeks later. So this is clearly worth a bit of a closer look. So let's start with Victoria Point Limited. I'm going to open that in a new tab to preserve that page. And what do I see? I see exactly the same as for a UK company. Victoria Point on the New Zealand Registry has a company number. We have a status of removed. That's interesting. And it was the dissolution date was the 25th of July 2011. And then we see this address. Now, I know this address very well. I've been involved with my friends and colleagues across both the OCCRP and the ICIJ, so the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists on a number of different stories and projects. And this address crops up frequently because it's the home to a company called GT Group, which was started by a man called Geoffrey Taylor. Now, Mr. Taylor, to be fair to him, has always protested his and his family's innocence of any wrongdoing. He was a company formation agent, and unfortunately for him, a very significant number of the companies he created went on to be used in various criminal enterprises, not least of which, famously, one was used as part of a sanctions-busting enterprise in North Korea, sending arms into Iran, and a whole host of them have appeared inside Russian, Azerbaijani laundromats, inside Danske Bank, and other problematic stories. So it's been really unfortunate for Mr. Taylor that his companies have been so abused. To the point that, in fact, the date of 2011 is very relevant because the New Zealand Registry shut down all of his companies in New Zealand in 2011 and struck them off their register. So I believe the reason they were removed in 2011 was because they were created by GT Group, which was a shame for these people who then had to start again in the UK. We can see here that actually Miss Nkuzena, as she was then, didn't become a director at the formation of the company, but a few weeks later. And originally the director was somebody called Ulpiano Calderon Moreno. So we should have a quick look at them just to see what we can find out. So the first thing we go here is we find that Ulpiano Calderon Moreno is the officer for 2,717 companies. So I think we could fairly comfortably say that Ulpiano is a proxy director. And if you missed it first time round, let me just go back a page and you'll see that he or she, and I'm honestly not sure which, gave an address which is the World Trade Center in Marbella in Panama City. And I would confess to not knowing that there was a Marbella in Panama City, but I do know that now. So clearly, Ulpiano was some sort of proxy, because you can't possibly be a director for 2,717 companies and actually do that as a job, because that would be impossible. So then we have Ulpiano. Rita obviously was the director of this and the four others, but we can also, the same as the UK, because the New Zealand Registry is pretty transparent as well, we can go and have a look at the New Zealand Registry, and I'm going to do that. So that's it is just a tad slower than the UK one. The UK is hosted on AWS, which is really quick, but it's neither here nor there. So here we have the registry entries for Victoria Point Limited. As you can see, here's that GT Group address. Here's Rita, and actually a different address in Latvia, but it was 15 years ago, so that's not that surprising. Here's her appointment date. But here we also have the, at the time of incorporation, the shareholder. And it was a company called Leader Limited of Majuro in the Marshall Islands. So this is becoming quite a geographic tour, isn't it? We've got a UK LLP, which is invested in Latvia. It has Belizean designated members. It has taken over apparently duties from a New Zealand company, which had a Panamanian as well as a Latvian director and a shareholder in the Marshall Islands. And sadly, one of the things that links most of those countries together is its secrecy. But there we are. The other thing we can show is the historic data for shareholders. And what that tells us is the original shareholder was a company called Vicam Auckland Limited, and that was a GT group, again, kind of proxy shareholder that you'll find at some point. I think some thousands of companies have had Vicam Auckland as their initial shareholder. So that's not too much of a surprise, but it does confirm the GT group connection. So that's Victoria Point. We shouldn't just assume that that's the same for all of them. So let's just go back from Victoria Point. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at High Vale. So High Vale Limited, again removed in July 2011. Same address, same details. The only difference here is that the predecessor to Erita was Mario Alvarado Castillo. So we ought to have a look at Mario. I think we can probably guess some of his provenance, and certainly his address is exactly the same as Orpiano's previously. Not a huge surprise, I guess. Mario's had somewhat fewer appointments, though. He's been 524 times an officer of a company. But actually, that first address is interesting because mainly he gives addresses in Panama. As if I scroll down, you'll see lots of Panamanian addresses, most of them the same. But that first one clearly isn't Panamanian. It's I think that's something like Metzliakovsky Lane in Moscow, which is that's an interesting place for Mario Castillo to have given an address. But that's a story for another day. So what do we know? So we've got another proxy here. There appears to be at least at some level a connection to Russia, which is odd, but no more than that. So here we have High Vale and another proxy director. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, of course, we've looked now for Arita. We ought to do the same thing for Marco. So let's go back to our original page and pick up Mr. Marco Giovanni Maria Secchi. And we'll copy that and we'll replace that with his name and have another go. And we find nobody. So apparently Mr. Secchi. Now, having said that, of course, that's it's a significant. We could just try cutting that down to just Mario Secchi, or Marco Secchi rather, to see if that makes any difference. Well, kind of. It's given us a couple of companies that have a Marco Secchi as director. Now, I think if you remember, Mr. Secchi was October 59 or thereabouts, so we can have a quick look. This one, actually, this is that old, we probably won't be able to look because it was dissolved in 1997, so we're not going to get any more than that, simply because the Companies House website only goes back in beta format, the free format, to 2014, 2015. And there's another one here for a restaurant in fairly newly registered in High Street, Rochester, from somebody called Marco Secchi. We could have a quick look at Companies House just to see whether that's potentially the same person or not. And this Marco Secchi has been born in March 1963, so that's clearly not the same one, unless he lied about his age. But I'm willing to accept that that's a very different Marco Secchi. And therefore, Marco doesn't have any directorships. But of course, that's not the end of the story, because it's not just directorships we're interested in, it's beneficial ownership. So let me introduce you to Open Ownership, which is a beneficial ownership record. Now, at the moment, because few countries actually publish these, it is relatively restricted to, I think, Denmark, UK, Slovakia, and Ukraine. But some of those are extraordinarily helpful locations. So let's see whether Mr. Secchi has any beneficial ownerships. And he apparently has 5. And they are Here we are. Let's make that page a bit bigger. Stafford Financial, Highvale LLP, Norwell Management LLP, Lanefield and Victoria Point. So Mr. Secchi is very clearly named himself as the person with significant control of each of these 5 LLPs. Now that does become intriguing now, because you'd have to ask the question: is it a sensible way to set up the ownership of your companies in Latvia to have them owned by UK limited liability partnerships for whom you are the person with significant control, but they are effectively run by 2 entities that are based as international business companies in Belize? So there's a complexity level to that, which isn't immediately obviously commercially sensible. So I think there's some reasonable questions to ask here. One of the other things you can do from OpenOwnership is just put a search onto Google for Mr. Secchi to see what else comes up, and I'll let that run in the background for the moment, because the other thing we should see is, well, has Arita ever been the PSC to any other company? So we'll put her name into OpenOwnership and see what comes out of that. And even though I can't spell it, OpenOwnership, bless them, let me put it in right. There we go. It tells us there are 3 results from Arita. One of these results here includes details of 2 other merged records. Now, one of the things you might be wondering is, well, why does that come up as 3 separate ones when Marco came up as 5? And the reason is that Arita has managed to spell her name 3 different ways. We have Arita Enkuzena Secchi, 3 separate words, top one. Arita Enkuzeni hyphen Secchi, no spaces, second one. Arita Enkuzena space hyphen space Secchi, third one. But OpenOwnership says, no, I reckon they're all the same people. They've got the same date of birth and the same address. Stands to reason they're the same. And I think if we look at these, we will see that Stafford Financial is one. We'll see that Victoria Point is the second. And I'm hoping that Highvale, Norwell and Lanefield are the 3rd, 4th and 5th. Excuse me. So let's just take stock. Where are we here? And while I'm doing that, I'll just open that on the Google search on Arita as well. So where we are is in the slightly unusual situation of having somebody who was the director of 5 New Zealand companies who were all owned by a Marshall Islands company whose provenance we don't know. Those companies were unfortunately located at an address that is associated with the GT Group, which is also unfortunately associated with a large number of companies that have gone on to be involved in criminal activity. Now, that doesn't mean that these companies are, it just means they use GT Group as their formation agent, but it nevertheless is an unfortunate thing to have done. We know because all the GT Group companies were shut down in 2011, that they were shut down and immediately created 5 more companies through the limited liability partnership route here in the UK, and again used offshore control via Belizean companies as their control framework. And we know that those 5 companies have invested in 3 Latvian companies. So, okay, fine. That's where we are. We ought to do a quick check online to see if there's any other worthwhile information. So let's start with Mr. Secchi. And actually, the first hit says that somebody called Marco Giovanni Maria Secchi, and I think that's probably him, owns a trademark or trademarks in the Czech Republic, in Czechia, which is, I mean, okay. And actually, that's quite interesting, because Autosoli, you may remember at the very beginning, was the name of one of the Latvian companies, Autosoli Motels, that these 5 LLPs invested in. For some reason, they appear to have been registered as trademarks in the Czech Republic. And another one called Fashion Room, which I have no idea of the provenance of that at all. And then we'll find mentions of some of the UK LLPs, which makes sense. He's also in the Lursoft database, which also makes sense, which is it's a Latvian database. It's mentioned in an article I wrote, which is not so surprising. So there we are. So not so much about Mr. Secchi, but a bit. For Arita, what can we find? Well, the first thing we find is that she's on LinkedIn and that she has named herself as director of the Alto Sole Hotel Group. And sure enough, Alto Sole hotels are a legitimate concern in Latvia. They are real businesses. These are not shell companies. They do business. I mean, we might wonder, and it would be an interesting question to ask, why their businesses are owned through this rather complex series of structures. Again, it doesn't mean that they've got criminal intent. There may be very good reasons why they want to mask their ownership. But you know, if you were doing due diligence, you really would want to know what that reason was. The other thing here, which is also quite interesting, is that Arita comes up on a reverse whois lookup. So it's a story a bit for another day, reverse whois lookups, because they are, rather than going for a domain name who registered it, you put somebody's name in and say, did they ever register any domain names? And it turns out that Arita's registered a whole bunch, all of which are clearly related to the businesses in Latvia: Secchi's hotels, Alto Sole hotels, Alto Sole apartments. So it kind of makes sense that this is a proper, ongoing concern. So that's those searches. I think if we look again, we'll find there'll be a number of corporate registries where, because Arita, along with her father-in-law or whatever, are named in those, and there's a number of Latvian web pages relating to them as well. So let me just go back to my original presentation. So that was my kind of wow moment, and obviously Arita was very distinctive, and that led us on that journey that started in the UK via Latvia and took us to Belize and to Panama and to New Zealand and to the Marshall Islands and to Czechia. So it's been a really nice global tour. Now, if you've found that interesting and would like to know a lot more about what we do and how we do our investigations, we are putting together a series of 6 masterclasses. We've run them live. Those are now coming to an end, but we will shortly be announcing your ability to do a pay-per-view approach, and we will be streaming these through a pay-per-view website. They won't be stupidly expensive. If you pay once, you'll be able to view as often as you want to. You'll be able to do them on an individual basis rather than the whole lot. So if some of these are of interest but not others, you can do them on a session by session basis. So watch out for that. There will be more to come from us. We will shortly be announcing our masterclasses on customer due diligence and enhanced due diligence, so keep an eye open for that. But in the meantime, it's just been a pleasure for me to be your host today. I hope you've enjoyed this session. I hope you've got something out of it, and we'll look forward to seeing you at some point soon at the Dark Money Files future events.